My name was rarely remembered by those around me because people seldom cared to ask. To most, I was just the man in the faded uniform, pushing a mop across the gleaming tiles of a skyscraper that did not belong to me. Every morning, before the sun had fully broken the horizon, I would step into that massive building with its glass walls and polished chrome, breathing in the sterile air of wealth and power that clung to every corner. My job was simple, though endless: cleaning floors that were already clean, emptying trash bins that barely held scraps, dusting desks that belonged to people who never once looked me in the eye. I lived a life of silence, a life that blended into the background like wallpaper no one bothers to notice. The routine of my days was predictable, and so was the way people treated me. Executives passed me as though I were invisible, their leather shoes tapping on marble floors while their eyes remained fixed on their glowing phones. Interns and assistants sometimes offered half smiles, but those were rare, quickly swallowed by the rush to impress someone in power. Even the security guards, who greeted every visitor with courtesy, rarely exchanged more than a nod with me. I had learned not to expect kindness. I had learned to fold my pride into a pocket deep inside me, where no one could reach it. My home reflected the simplicity of my life. A small one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city, its walls bare except for a single photo frame I never showed anyone. My furniture was old but sturdy, a mismatched collection of things picked up over the years. The fridge was rarely full, but it always had enough to keep me going. I lived alone, but I never complained. Silence was my companion, and routine was my anchor. I found peace in small things. The way morning light filtered through thin curtains, the sound of rain against the roof, the smell of strong coffee in a chipped mug. To anyone looking from the outside, I was a man who had nothing, and perhaps they were right. But I also carried something inside me, a patience forged by years of being overlooked, a strength that needed no audience. The building where I worked was the empire of one man, the CEO. His name echoed through the hallways like gospel, spoken in reverence, in fear, in envy. He was the kind of man whose footsteps announced his presence long before his voice did, because people straightened their backs, lowered their tones, and tried desperately not to falter in his gaze. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with hair slicked back like polished steel, his suits tailored to perfection, his watches worth more than my annual salary. His laughter was sharp and confident, the laughter of someone who believed the world itself bent for his amusement. The CEO lived a life of display. Every morning he arrived in a fleet of luxury cars, the kind most people only ever saw on posters or magazines. He would step out of a Lamborghini, a Ferrari, or sometimes even a Rolls-Royce, as if he had to remind the world daily of how untouchable he was. He walked through the building surrounded by assistants, his eyes scanning not faces but usefulness. To him, people were tools, and if they broke, he simply replaced them with newer, shinier ones. I, of course, was beneath his notice. Or so I thought. Until that day. It was a Monday morning, the kind of day when the office buzzed with the restless energy of deadlines and meetings. I was mopping the lobby floor, careful to move quickly before the flood of employees entered. The marble gleamed under the lights, so polished you could see your reflection. I bent low, wringing out the mop, my back aching from years of labor that no one acknowledged. The sound came first, the deep, growling roar of an engine that didn't belong to ordinary streets. People turned their heads, some rushing to the glass windows, their faces lighting up as if royalty had arrived. And in a way, he had. The CEO had chosen that morning to arrive in his Lamborghini, a sleek, metallic beast that shimmered like liquid silver under the rising sun. The sound of it silenced conversations, and when the glass doors slid open, he walked in with his usual entourage trailing behind him. His suit was a dark navy, his tie blood red, and his shoes shined so brightly they seemed untouched by dust. I lowered my eyes, continuing my work, but I could feel the shift in the air as his presence filled the lobby. The assistants moved quickly, staff offered their greetings, and the receptionist nearly tripped over her words welcoming him. For a moment, it was as if the world had stopped just to acknowledge his existence. And then his gaze fell on me. It was quick at first, a passing glance. But something in my posture, perhaps the fact that I was crouched low with a mop in my hand while everyone else stood tall in suits, caught his attention. He slowed his steps, his entourage pausing behind him. His eyes narrowed, lips curving into the kind of smile that wasn't born of kindness, but of cruelty. "Look at this," he said loudly, his voice echoing in the marble hall. "The floor is already shining like glass, yet here he is, scrubbing as if he's polishing a palace." People chuckled nervously, unsure whether to laugh or stay silent. I kept my head down, wringing the mop, pretending not to hear. But he wasn't done. He stepped closer, his leather shoes clicking sharply against the floor until they stopped just a foot away from my bucket. He leaned slightly, his voice dripping with mockery. "Tell me, janitor, do you think anyone notices you? Do you think anyone cares how hard you scrub? You're just cleaning the dirt so the rest of us don't have to see it." Laughter erupted behind him, forced and cruel, as his assistants played along. Heat rushed through my chest, but I steadied my breathing, focusing on the mop in my hand. He tilted his head, studying me as though I were an insect pinned under glass. "Tell me something," he continued, his voice louder now so the lobby could hear. "When you look at me, walking in with my Lamborghini parked outside, do you ever feel ashamed of what you are? Or have you accepted that some men are born to drive cars like that, and some men are born to clean the floors beneath them?" The laughter grew louder. Some people glanced at me with pity. Others avoided my gaze altogether. My fingers tightened around the mop handle, but I didn't lift my head. My pride screamed for me to stand, to speak, to shout. But I didn't. I simply straightened my back slowly, rising to my feet. The mop dripped quietly into the bucket, the sound somehow louder than the laughter. I turned my face toward him. Not defiant, not broken, just calm. My eyes met his, steady and unshaken. For a brief second, the laughter faltered. His smirk wavered, just slightly, as though he had expected me to lower my gaze in shame, to flinch under the weight of his words. But I didn't. I stood there silently, my expression unreadable, my posture still, my eyes locked on his with a calmness that unsettled even him. And in that silence, something shifted. He scoffed, muttered something under his breath, and turned away, barking orders at his assistants as he walked toward the elevators. The crowd dispersed quickly, conversations resuming, laughter fading. But I noticed the way a few people looked back at me, their eyes wide with something they couldn't quite name. I picked up my mop again, lowering it back into the bucket, the rhythm of my work resuming as though nothing had happened. But inside me, something stirred. Not anger, not humiliation, but a quiet certainty that this was not the end of the story. Because while he believed I was just a janitor, I carried a truth he could not imagine. And soon, that truth would roar louder than his laughter. From where I stood, pushing my mop down endless corridors and wiping fingerprints off glass doors, I had an unfiltered view of the world he lived in. Not because I was a part of it. No, I would never be invited into those boardrooms with walls lined in walnut and leather chairs that cost more than my annual salary. I was not meant to sip champagne under chandeliers or shake hands at galas where deals worth millions were made in whispers. My role was simply to stand at the edges of it, invisible yet observant, the man who cleaned up the footprints left by people too important to notice me. And from those edges, I saw clearly the kingdom that arrogance had built around him. The CEO lived in excess, and he made sure everyone knew it. His mornings began with spectacle. The office lobby would buzz with anticipation the moment his car engine echoed outside the glass walls. Employees who were slouched at their desks straightened instantly, Conversations were cut short mid-sentence, and assistants scurried with clipboards as though preparing for the arrival of royalty. When the automatic doors opened, it was never just him who walked in. It was the weight of his wealth, the aura of his pride, and the reminder that in this building, he was God. One morning it would be a Ferrari, crimson red with curves that looked like they had been painted by fire itself. The next, a Rolls-Royce with its spirit of ecstasy glinting in the sun, as though mocking everyone who dared to drive anything less. But the one that stole the most gasps was always the Lamborghini. Metallic silver, angular, sharp. A beast that seemed less like a car and more like a predator crouched on wheels. Its roar could silence every conversation in a 3-block radius, and its presence alone was enough to make people press their faces against the glass just to catch a glimpse. But what fascinated people most wasn't just the Lamborghini itself, it was the way he guarded it. He treated that machine like it carried his soul. No valet was allowed to touch it. No employee was allowed to come near it. Not even his closest associates had ever been seen in the driver's seat. He would stand near it during events, his hand brushing the polished hood as if it were alive, his voice loud as he boasted about its rarity, its power, its cost. "This car is mine alone," he would say, his smirk daring anyone to challenge that statement. To him, the car wasn't just a machine. It was a throne on wheels, a symbol of his superiority, proof that he stood at a height others could never reach. He knew it intimidated people, and he loved it. He thrived on the awe in their eyes, the whispers in their voices, the envy that spread like wildfire every time he drove past. For him, life wasn't about living. It was about being seen. And being seen meant showing power in the cruelest of ways. I lost count of the number of times I watched him humiliate his own employees, reducing them to nothing with a single remark. Once, a young intern spilled coffee on a presentation file by accident. She had been working late into the night, her eyes sunken with exhaustion, her hands trembling as she stood before him in the boardroom. He looked at the stain on the paper, then looked at her, his lips curling into that familiar, mocking smile. "Do you know how much this meeting is worth?" he asked coldly. She stammered an apology, but he cut her off. "You can't even carry a cup of coffee without ruining it. Do you think you belong here?" The room had fallen silent, and the girl had run out with tears streaking her face. He didn't even blink. Another time, I saw him berate a senior employee, a man old enough to be his father, in front of the entire floor. The man had miscalculated a minor figure in a report, something easily corrected. But to the CEO, it was an opportunity to display dominance. "If you can't even count, maybe you should go back to school," he sneered, his voice carrying across the open office. The man lowered his head, his shoulders hunched with shame, while others pretended to type at their computers, terrified of drawing attention. I remember standing in the corner, emptying a trash bin, and feeling the sting of humiliation on his behalf. The CEO didn't just lead with authority, he ruled with cruelty. That was his pride. To him, fear was loyalty, silence was respect, and cruelty was power. He believed himself untouchable, a man above consequences, a man destined to laugh while others trembled. And yet I knew better. I had seen men like him before. Pride has a way of building palaces on sand, and arrogance is always blind to the cracks forming beneath its own feet. The Lamborghini became the crown jewel of his arrogance. Employees whispered about it constantly, especially the rumor that no one but him could start it. It wasn't just that he refused to let others drive it. It was that people claimed they had tried and failed. Mechanics had inspected it once when he flaunted its special system, and they too had walked away baffled. "It's more than a car," he told people, his smirk dripping with superiority. "It's a machine that recognizes its master. You can sit in it, you can touch the wheel, but unless you're me, it will never roar to life." Whether it was a custom security feature, a quirk of engineering, or just his boast twisted into myth, No one knew for sure. But the rumor grew like wildfire. The Lamborghini wasn't just his car anymore. It was his weapon, his symbol of power. Employees told the story to each other in hushed voices, almost reverent, as though the machine itself was enchanted. And he loved it. Every whisper was fuel to his pride, every rumor another layer of the armor he wrapped around himself. I would sometimes pass the parking area, mop in hand, and see him standing beside it, his reflection gleaming in the polished surface. He always caught people staring and never missed the chance to humiliate them. "Don't strain your eyes," he'd laugh. "It's not meant for people like you." They would force a chuckle, pretending it didn't sting, but I could see the envy etched on their faces. And each time I remained silent, pushing my mop, blending into the shadows. I let him believe I was invisible, let him feed his pride with laughter that echoed in the hallways. But deep inside, I carried a secret, one I never spoke of, one I kept buried beneath the silence of my humble life, because I knew something he didn't. That Lamborghini, the one he claimed no one else could start, wasn't as much of a mystery to me as it was to everyone else. I had seen its kind before. I had touched machines like it, breathed the smell of burning rubber and fuel, felt engines roar beneath my hands. My silence wasn't born of weakness. It was born of knowledge. So when he stood tall, his laughter cutting through the air like a blade, I stayed calm, because I knew that one day pride would demand a challenge. One day, arrogance would force him to prove his power in front of everyone. And when that day came, I would be waiting. To most people, I was just a background figure in a faded uniform, carrying a mop and pushing a cart of cleaning supplies. They saw me wiping windows, scrubbing floors, emptying trash bins, and thought there was nothing more to my story. In their eyes, my life began and ended with that mop in my hand, as if I had been born for the sole purpose of cleaning up after others. That was the comfort of their assumptions. It allowed them to step over me without guilt, to dismiss me without hesitation. But the truth was different. The truth was heavier. The truth was something I carried silently, like a locked chest in the depths of my soul. And though I never spoke of it, people noticed little things, small details, enough to spark whispers. It began one afternoon when I was cleaning the underground parking lot, where the CEO's fleet of cars rested like a museum of wealth. The polished concrete floor reflected rows of steel, chrome, and glass, machines lined up like soldiers awaiting command. Most employees avoided walking through that area. They were afraid to even glance too long at the cars, as if staring at them would expose their poverty. But I had no such fear. I moved between them, mop in hand, my eyes tracing every curve, every detail, not with envy, but with familiarity. That day, one of the junior executives rushed in, his expensive shoes clicking nervously as he circled around his own modest sedan. The car refused to start, its headlights flickering dimly. I watched silently as he cursed under his breath, fumbling with the keys. He slammed the hood shut in frustration, then noticed me nearby. His first instinct was to sneer, to bark at me for standing too close. But before the words could leave his lips, I stepped forward. "Battery," I said simply, pointing at the faint corrosion around the terminals. He frowned, skeptical, but I reached into my cart and pulled out a rag, wiping the buildup clean before tightening the loose connection with a small wrench I kept tucked away. When he turned the key again, the engine roared to life. He stared at me, baffled, his arrogance cracking for just a moment. "How did you—" he began, but I was already walking away, pushing my cart toward the next corner. By the next morning, whispers had spread. "The janitor fixed an engine with his bare hands," someone said near the elevators. Another added, "Not just fixed it, he knew the problem with one glance." Their voices were low, careful not to be overheard by managers, but I caught them all the same. It was the first spark. Over the weeks, those sparks grew. People began to notice how I paused whenever I passed the CEO's Lamborghini. my eyes lingering not in awe, but in analysis. I would glance at the tailpipes, at the micro scratches on the rims, at the subtle hum when he started the engine. To others, it looked like the gaze of a poor man staring at wealth he could never have. But to those who looked closer, it seemed different. It was the gaze of someone who understood. I remember once, during a rare, quiet afternoon, a group of employees stood by the break room, discussing cars like children comparing toys. One of them said, "The boss's Lamborghini has a custom system. No one else can start it, not even professional mechanics." Another laughed nervously, adding, "It's like the car belongs to him and him alone." I was wiping down the glass nearby when one of them turned to me with a smirk. "Hey, janitor," he said mockingly. "You ever seen a machine like that before?" His tone carried the weight of ridicule, expecting me to shrink, to laugh along awkwardly. But I didn't laugh. I looked at him evenly, my rag pausing in my hand. "Yes," I said softly. "I've seen machines like that." The laughter died in his throat. He stared at me, uncertain, as though trying to decide whether I was joking. Before he could press further, I turned and walked away. And in my silence, suspicion grew. By the end of the week, whispers followed me like shadows. "They say he used to be more than a janitor. Maybe he worked with cars before." No, I heard he used to be an engineer." "Or maybe a racer? Did you see the way he looked at that Lamborghini?" The stories multiplied, twisted, reshaped with each retelling. Some swore I had once owned cars of my own, others claimed I had been part of a racing team, while a few even suggested I had worked for the very company that built the Lamborghini. No one knew the truth, and I never gave them any answers. I let the rumors swirl like smoke, because silence was more powerful than denial. But I couldn't deny the truth to myself. At night, when I returned to my small apartment, I would sit in the dim glow of a single lamp, my hands clasped together, remembering. My fingers still carried the memory of leather steering wheels, the vibration of engines alive beneath me, the heat of asphalt burning under tires. I remembered long nights in garages where the air reeked of oil and metal, where my hands turned black with grease, where my heart raced not from exhaustion but from passion. I remembered a younger version of myself, standing not with a mop but with blueprints in my hands, my eyes alive with dreams. But those days were gone, buried beneath betrayal and choices I no longer spoke of. Still, I couldn't help the way my body responded whenever I heard the CEO's Lamborghini roar. It wasn't envy, it was recognition. The kind of recognition that runs deeper than admiration, like hearing a song you once wrote being played by someone else. I knew that machine. I understood its voice, its heartbeat, its secrets. And though the world only saw me as a janitor, there were moments I caught people staring at me differently, moments when they realized there was more to me than the uniform on my back. Once, as I pushed my cart down the corridor late at night, I overheard 2 security guards speaking softly. "It's strange, isn't it?" one said. "The janitor. He never flinches when the boss mocks him. Most people get angry or embarrassed. But him? He just stands there calm, like he knows something we don't." "Yeah," the other replied. "And the way he looks at that Lamborghini. It's not awe. It's something else. Like he could drive it better than the boss himself." Their laughter followed, but their voices carried unease. And that unease grew. Because in a world where power belonged to the CEO and his untouchable machines, the possibility that a janitor, someone they all dismissed, could hold a truth greater than the man at the top was too dangerous to ignore. It unsettled them. It unsettled even me. Still, I stayed silent. Silence was my shield, my choice. I let the world believe whatever it wanted because I knew the day was coming when silence would no longer be enough. The day was coming when pride would demand proof. And when that day came, the whispers in the shadows would no longer be whispers. They would be truths shouted in the roar of an engine no one else could tame. The day he decided to turn me into his spectacle began like any other. I was in the lobby, bent over with my mop, tracing long arcs across the marble floor that gleamed like water under the morning light. My movements were steady, practiced from years of repetition. My mind quiet as the building slowly filled with the footsteps of employees. I had grown used to being overlooked, to blending into the background like the furniture. But that morning, he noticed me. The CEO entered with his usual entourage, assistants scurrying behind him, security guards pacing with purpose, and a group of executives laughing too loudly at jokes they didn't find funny. His navy suit looked freshly pressed, his red tie a bold slash across his chest, his shoes so polished that the floor reflected him as clearly as a mirror. The sound of his Lamborghini's engine still echoed faintly from the underground parking, a growl that had silenced conversations the moment it arrived. I was nothing more than part of the scenery, a man in a faded uniform pushing a mop, my back slightly bent. But perhaps that was why he chose me, because mocking someone invisible makes the laughter louder. He slowed his steps, his smirk spreading as his eyes locked on me. "Well, well," he said, his voice sharp enough to slice through the murmur of conversations. "What do we have here? The floor is already shining, yet our janitor insists on polishing it as if he's preparing a stage for royalty." The employees around us chuckled nervously, unsure whether to laugh or stay silent. I kept my head down, focusing on the mop, but my heart thudded once against my ribs. I knew what was coming. He stepped closer, his leather shoes clicking until they stopped right in front of me. "Tell me," he said louder this time, his words meant for the crowd as much as for me. "When you look at me, walking in with my Lamborghini parked outside, don't you feel ashamed? Scrubbing floors while real men drive machines worth more than your entire life?" The laughter behind him grew. Some people clutched their files tighter, others pretended to check their phones, but their ears strained to catch every word. A few glanced at me quickly, pity flickering in their eyes before they looked away. No one dared to intervene. No one ever did. I straightened slowly, the mop dripping into the bucket with soft splashes. My eyes lifted to meet his. Steady, calm, unreadable. For a heartbeat, the smirk on his lips faltered, but he quickly regained it, chuckling loudly. "Look at him," he announced, turning slightly so the crowd could hear. "He thinks if he stares long enough, he'll rise above his place. But a mop doesn't turn into a key, and a janitor doesn't turn into a driver." The laughter swelled again, forced and cruel. His entourage roared the loudest, eager to show their loyalty. The sound filled the lobby, bouncing off the marble and glass, ringing in my ears like a mockery that would not end. But I didn't flinch. I didn't lower my gaze or mutter apologies. I stood quietly, holding the mop with both hands, my expression calm, my silence louder than his insults. And that silence unsettled him. He leaned closer, his voice dropping so only I could hear. "You'll never touch a machine like mine. Remember that." Then he turned, striding toward the elevators, his entourage following like shadows. The laughter faded as the crowd dispersed, though the whispers began immediately. "Did you see his face? He didn't even blink." Strange, wasn't it? Anyone else would have been humiliated. Maybe he's used to it. No, it was different. Like he knows something. I pushed my mop forward, moving back into my routine as though nothing had happened. But I could feel their eyes on me, lingering longer than before. My dignity had not been shattered. Instead, it stood in sharp contrast to his arrogance. And people noticed. By lunchtime, the building buzzed with gossip. In the cafeteria, employees huddled in corners, their voices low but insistent. "The boss really went after him today," someone said. "But the janitor, he didn't break." Another added, "It was like he wasn't embarrassed at all, like he was waiting." The rumors of my past, already swirling from earlier incidents, gained momentum. Some swore I had been in the automotive industry, others claimed I once worked on luxury cars, and a few even suggested I had raced them. No one knew the truth, but silence was fertile soil, and speculation grew like weeds. I kept to myself, moving quietly between hallways, collecting trash, wiping glass, polishing the CEO's world until it sparkled. But everywhere I went, I heard the whispers. Security guards at their posts, interns in elevators, assistants by the copier. All of them spoke about me when they thought I wasn't listening. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was unease. Because while the CEO's laughter had been loud, my silence had been louder. And silence, when wrapped around dignity, unsettles arrogance more than anger ever could. The CEO himself must have felt it. Over the next few days, he grew sharper, his temper more volatile. I caught him glaring at me once in the lobby, his eyes narrowing as though trying to pierce the calm mask I wore. He mocked me again, smaller jabs here and there, but the laughter around him never sounded as full as it had before. His power was being questioned, not openly, but in the quiet way people averted their eyes when he spoke too cruelly. The contrast between his arrogance and my quiet strength was becoming too visible. And it all revolved around that Lamborghini. The rumor had become legend now. The Lamborghini could not be started by anyone but him. Employees whispered about it endlessly, their voices filled with awe and suspicion. "He guards it like it's his throne," one said. "But what if the janitor knows how to drive it?" another teased, half joking, half serious. Laughter followed, but it was uneasy laughter, tinged with the possibility that maybe, just maybe, it was true. The irony was not lost on me. The very car he flaunted as a symbol of his superiority was becoming the axis of doubt. His laughter, the same weapon he used to humiliate me, was beginning to backfire, planting seeds of curiosity in the minds of those who witnessed it. I went home that night, the echoes of laughter still ringing faintly in my ears. I sat in my small apartment, staring at the single framed photograph on my shelf. My hand traced the edge of the frame, my heart heavy with memories I never spoke aloud. My life had once been different. I had walked among machines that purred like lions, my hands shaping engines, my ears tuned to roars of power. That life was gone, stolen by betrayal and choices that left scars deeper than anyone could see. But pieces of it remained in me, hidden beneath the uniform, hidden in the silence that unsettled even the powerful. The CEO believed he had humiliated me that day. He believed his laughter had cut me down to nothing. But arrogance blinds men to the truth, because I knew something he didn't. And one day soon, the opportunity to reveal it would come. The day of the event arrived with more anticipation than most company gatherings ever stirred. It was supposed to be a celebration of yet another milestone, a merger, a new partnership, or some financial victory the CEO wanted to flaunt. But the truth was, nobody cared about the speeches or the handshakes. The real reason the employees buzzed with restless excitement was parked in the center of the courtyard, the CEO's Lamborghini. It was no ordinary car. Its sleek black body gleamed under the sunlight like liquid obsidian, every curve reflecting the envy and admiration of the crowd. The gold-trimmed rims spun slowly as he eased it into place, the deep growl of the engine silencing every conversation. People gathered instinctively, drawn by the power of the machine as much as the arrogance of its owner. He stepped out with his usual flourish, the crowd applauding not out of genuine admiration, but because they feared what would happen if they didn't. His navy suit clung perfectly to his tall frame, his red tie catching the wind like a flag of dominance. He smirked as he adjusted his cufflinks, scanning the crowd the way a king surveys peasants at his feet. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice booming through the portable microphone the staff had set up for him. "Today we celebrate success. But what is success without power, without control, without luxury that no one else can touch?" He gestured toward the Lamborghini behind him, its golden emblem catching the light like a crown. "This This beauty is not just a car. It's a statement, a machine that bows only to its master. The crowd clapped again, some louder than others, while whispers spread in the back. Everyone knew the story. The Lamborghini wasn't just his favorite toy. It was his fortress. It had been customized with a start system so intricate that no mechanic, no driver, not even his own executives dared to attempt it. The rumor was that he had designed it that way deliberately, to remind everyone that he alone had the key, both literally and figuratively. And he thrived on that rumor. "Tell me," he said, pacing with his microphone, "who here believes they could drive a machine like this? Anyone?" The crowd stirred, nervous laughter rippling through it. A few people shifted uncomfortably, eyes dropping to the ground, not daring to meet his gaze. He chuckled, the sound sharp, dripping with mockery. "No, of course not, because this car doesn't bow to ordinary men. It doesn't bow to interns, assistants, or janitors." The word cut through the crowd like a blade. Heads turned toward me instinctively, standing at the edge with my mop leaning against the courtyard stone wall. I had been cleaning the steps earlier, watching the event quietly from the shadows. Now, suddenly, I was the unwilling target of his cruelty once again. The laughter rose, louder this time, fueled by the open challenge in his voice. Some employees laughed awkwardly, others looked at me with pity, but all of them knew better than to defend me. In this company, no one stood against him. He raised his eyebrows dramatically, his grin widening. "No volunteers? No brave souls? Very well. Let's make this interesting." He turned to the car, tapping the hood affectionately, as if it were a living creature. "I challenge anyone here, to come forward and try to start it. If you can, the car is yours for the day. Drive it wherever you want, take photos, brag to your friends. If you can." Gasps rippled through the employees. For a fleeting moment, eyes lit with temptation. The thought of driving a Lamborghini, his Lamborghini, was enough to stir even the most timid hearts. But just as quickly, fear replaced the flicker of hope. No one dared step forward. Not because they didn't want to, but because they knew what failure would mean. To try and fail would be worse than staying silent. The CEO smirked, enjoying the tension. "What's the matter? Afraid? Do you think it's impossible? Or is it that you all know you're not worthy?" He laughed, tossing his head back, the sound filling the courtyard like the roar of his engine. "That's right, because only I can tame this machine. Only I hold the key to its power. And the rest of you," his gaze swept across the crowd, landing on me once more, "are destined to watch from the sidelines." The laughter swelled again, crueler now, feeding off his arrogance. Employees whispered among themselves, their voices carrying fragments of fear and awe. "No one will dare." "He's right. It's impossible. Why would anyone humiliate themselves?" I remained where I was, leaning slightly on my mop, my expression calm. On the surface, I was the picture of indifference, but inside, my heart stirred. Not with anger, but with a quiet knowing. His words, his laughter, his arrogance, they were all weapons meant to remind me of my place. Yet, deep down, I knew something he didn't. The crowd began to disperse slightly, murmurs fading into silence as no one accepted the challenge. The CEO grinned triumphantly, spreading his arms. "See? This is the difference between me and all of you. You admire from afar while I conquer. You dream while I live." He strutted back to the driver's seat, sliding inside with the confidence of a man who believed the world bent to his will. He revved the engine once more, the growl reverberating through the courtyard, a beast chained only to him. The crowd cheered, though the cheer carried no warmth, only fear and obligation. But as the roar faded, as the employees shuffled uneasily, their eyes kept flickering back toward me. Whispers began again, louder this time, bolder. "Did you see? He looked right at the janitor. Why does he always bring him up? Maybe there's a reason. Do you think he could actually start it? The question hung in the air, unspoken by most but felt by all. Their laughter had shifted, their curiosity growing stronger than their fear. The CEO, in his arrogance, had planted the seed himself. By mocking me publicly again and again, he had made me more than invisible. He had made me a mystery, and mysteries demand answers. I wiped my hands on my uniform, as though simply finishing my work, but my mind was sharp, alert. I watched him bask in the applause, the smug grin never leaving his face, and I thought to myself, he has no idea. For while he believed the Lamborghini answered only to him, the truth was very different. The truth was, I knew that car better than he ever would. And though I stood in silence, blending into the shadows of the courtyard, my time was coming. The courtyard buzzed with a strange mixture of awe and nervousness. The Lamborghini still sat gleaming like a predator in the sun, its sharp lines cutting the air, its golden emblem daring anyone to try what the CEO swore no one could do. Employees stood clustered in small groups, whispering with wide eyes, still reeling from the arrogance of his challenge. No one dared step forward. No one wanted to risk humiliation. But I had already made my choice. I leaned my mop against the wall slowly, my movements deliberate, my eyes never leaving the black beast that seemed to thrum even in stillness. For weeks, for months, I had listened to the CEO mock me. I had endured his laughter, his sharp words, his cruelty in silence. And now, fate had given me the stage he didn't realize he had built. I stepped forward. At first, no one noticed. My shoes tapped softly against the courtyard stones as I moved out of the shadows, each step echoing like a drumbeat in my chest. Heads turned gradually, one by one, until a ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. What's he doing? No, he wouldn't. He's walking toward it. Gasps rose as realization struck. The janitor, me, the man in the faded uniform, the man with calloused hands and weary eyes, was heading straight for the Lamborghini. The CEO spotted me immediately. His grin widened, his laughter erupting louder than ever. He slammed his palm against the steering wheel, the sound sharp like a whip. "Oh, this is rich!" he roared through the open window. "The janitor thinks he can play with lions." The crowd laughed again, but this time it was uneasy laughter, strained at the edges. Some people stepped back to give me room, their eyes glued to me as though I were walking a tightrope high above the ground. Others whispered frantically, torn between excitement and dread. I kept walking. My face was calm, my eyes steady, though inside my heart pounded like a racing engine. Each step carried not just my body, but the weight of every insult, every smirk, every cruel word he had thrown my way. I could feel the eyes of the entire company on me, their breaths held as if my next move could tilt the world. The CEO leaned halfway out of the car, still laughing, his voice dripping with mockery. "Tell me, do you even know where the key goes? Do you think this is some old rusted truck you can twist alive? This machine is smarter than you'll ever be." I stopped at the driver's door, my reflection staring back at me from the polished surface. For a moment, I saw the janitor everyone else saw. The man in a faded uniform, overlooked, underestimated, ridiculed. But behind that reflection, I saw something else. The man I used to be. The man who once lived and breathed engines, who once touched machines like this not as a dream but as reality. I placed my hand on the handle. The crowd hushed instantly. Even the CEO's laughter faltered, caught in his throat as he realized I wasn't hesitating. I pulled the handle gently, and the door opened with a smooth click. Gasps erupted like fireworks. "He opened it." How did he know?" "This isn't possible." The CEO barked another laugh, forcing confidence back into his voice. "So what? You can open the door. Congratulations, janitor. That's as far as you'll go." I slid into the driver's seat, the leather cool against my uniform, the air heavy with the scent of luxury. My hands rested briefly on the wheel, my fingers brushing against the smooth surface. And for the first time in years, I felt the electric thrill of connection. The Lamborghini wasn't just a car. It was a beast, a heartbeat waiting to roar. And I knew its rhythm better than he ever could. The CEO leaned across, sneering. "Go on. Humiliate yourself. Show everyone you don't belong here." I didn't answer. I reached for the key. The moment my hand touched it, the entire courtyard fell silent. The laughter died. Whispers froze in throats. Even the CEO's smug grin faltered. It was as if time itself had paused, holding its breath with the crowd. The key felt familiar in my palm, heavy with promise, sharp with memory. My fingers wrapped around it, steady despite the storm inside me. I slid it into the ignition with practiced ease, the soft click echoing louder than the roar of an engine could have. Every pair of eyes was locked on me now. Executives leaned forward, interns clutched each other's arms, assistants covered their mouths. The courtyard was no longer a stage for the CEO. It was mine. The CEO forced a chuckle, but it sounded hollow. "Even if you manage to turn it, nothing will happen. This car was designed for me. It doesn't answer to nobody's." But his voice trembled, just faintly. My hand rested on the key, my other hand gripping the wheel. I closed my eyes for a brief second, feeling the hum beneath my fingers, the silence before the storm. The Lamborghini wasn't untouchable. Not to me. It never had been. I twisted the key. The crowd inhaled sharply, the sound a single collective gasp that filled the courtyard like wind before thunder. For one impossible heartbeat, nothing happened. The world seemed to balance on the edge of a blade. The CEO's grin began to return, his laughter bubbling in his chest, ready to erupt again. But then, the Lamborghini answered me with a roar so powerful it seemed to shake the courtyard itself. The engine ignited, a thunderous growl that echoed off the walls, sharp and alive, the kind of sound that made the ground tremble and hearts skip. It was the kind of sound no one in that courtyard would ever forget, because it wasn't supposed to be possible. Not for anyone but him. The crowd gasped collectively, the noise rising in waves of disbelief. Hands flew to mouths, eyes widened, whispers tumbled over each other in a frantic rush. He started it. He actually started it. But how? That's impossible. And the CEO, oh, the CEO. His laughter died in his throat, cut short like a candle in the wind. His grin collapsed, his jaw hanging open as he stared at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. For the first time since I'd known him, his arrogance cracked. He didn't look like a king surveying his subjects anymore. He looked like a man watching his throne burn before his eyes. I gripped the steering wheel, the vibrations pulsing into my palms like a long-forgotten heartbeat. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with memory. The sound of that engine was more than just noise. It was a voice from my past, calling me back to the man I used to be. I turned my head slowly toward the crowd, their stunned faces staring at me as though I had transformed from a janitor into someone else entirely. And in a way, I had. The CEO finally found his voice, though it cracked with panic. This is a trick. There's no way. No one but me can—" He stopped himself, shaking his head violently, as though trying to shatter the reality staring him in the face. "How did you do it?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I pressed my foot gently against the accelerator, the Lamborghini roaring louder, the sound filling the air like thunder. The crowd jumped at the ferocity of it, their awe thick enough to silence every doubt. Then I eased my foot off, letting the beast purr in idle, its deep hum vibrating through the stones beneath us. And I finally spoke. I wasn't always a janitor. The words weren't loud, but they carried across the courtyard, amplified by the silence that swallowed every other sound. All eyes locked on me, every breath held, waiting. I glanced at the CEO, his face pale, his hands gripping the edge of the door as though it were the only thing keeping him upright. "You think you know cars," I said softly, almost pitying. "But I knew them before you ever touched a steering wheel." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Executives exchanged bewildered glances. Interns leaned forward. Assistants froze in place. Curiosity surged like a flood, unstoppable. I looked down at the wheel beneath my hands, memories flooding in unbidden. Years ago, this was my world. Not mops, not buckets, not polished floors, machines, engines, designs that only a few men on Earth could dream of building. I took a deep breath. I wasn't cleaning after the powerful. I was helping create the very machines that gave them power. The shock deepened. People began to whisper frantically, trying to piece together the fragments. "He's an engineer." "No, he said designs." "Was he a designer?" "Wait, was he a driver?" I smiled faintly, though it carried no joy. I was all of it. An engineer, a designer, a mechanic, and sometimes a test driver. I breathed life into engines, and in return they gave me freedom. The CEO's face twisted with disbelief, his arrogance struggling to resurface. "You expect us to believe that? That a janitor—" But one of the older executives cut him off. His voice trembled as he spoke, his eyes wide as though recognizing something. I've heard this before. Years ago there was a man, an engineer who worked with European manufacturers, a genius with machines. He disappeared suddenly, and no one knew why." He turned his gaze to me, his voice dropping almost to a whisper. "It was you, wasn't it?" Murmurs surged like wildfire. Faces turned toward me with awe, suspicion, and disbelief all tangled together. I nodded once. That was me. For a moment, the courtyard blurred, my vision filling with fragments of the life I had buried. The long nights in the garage, oil staining my hands as I tightened bolts with a precision only love could fuel. The first time I sat behind the wheel of a prototype, the engine purring like it recognized me. The cheers of engineers as we watched a machine we had built tear across a track, faster and fiercer than anything before it. That was my world, that was my identity. But those memories weren't unbroken joy. They carried shadows, too. Betrayal, loss, choices that cut deeper than any wound. I leaned back slightly, my voice steady though my heart ached. "Do you want to know why I push a mop now? Why I live in silence while the world I once knew moved on without me?" The crowd leaned in, the air heavy with suspense. Even the CEO, trembling with humiliation, could not resist his own curiosity. His pride demanded answers, though he would never admit it. I let the silence stretch, long enough for their questions to burn brighter. Then I said quietly, "Because sometimes brilliance paints a target on your back, and sometimes the ones closest to you are the ones who cut the deepest." Gasps spread again. But this time it wasn't just shock. It was hunger. Everyone wanted the full story. They wanted to know what betrayal, what tragedy, what choices had dragged a man from designing machines worth millions to cleaning floors for pennies. I turned off the engine slowly, the Lamborghini dying into silence. The sound faded, but its echo lingered in every corner of the courtyard. I stepped out, standing taller than I ever had in that uniform, the weight of the past and present colliding in my chest. The employees stepped back instinctively, not out of disdain but out of awe. The janitor they had overlooked for so long now stood before them as someone entirely different. I looked at the CEO, his face pale and sweaty, his arrogance stripped away. "You laughed at me because you thought you knew who I was," I said quietly. "But you never even saw me." His lips trembled, his eyes darting wildly as though searching for words. But none came. The courtyard remained hushed, the weight of my revelation hanging in the air like a storm waiting to break. I bent down briefly, picking up the mop I had left against the wall. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same hands that had built engines capable of conquering roads now gripped a janitor's tool. And yet both told the truth of my life. I met the eyes of the crowd, their gazes filled with questions that demanded answers. And I knew the next part of the story would not just be about machines or betrayal. It would be about the choices that brought me here. The courtyard still buzzed with shock, the echoes of the Lamborghini's roar lingering in the air long after I had turned the engine off. Employees whispered in hushed voices, their eyes darting between me and the CEO, their minds trying to piece together the impossible. I had touched what no one dared to touch, started what no one believed could be started. And in that moment, the untouchable king had been dethroned by the man he mocked most. And that truth was unbearable for him. The CEO climbed out of the passenger side of the car with stiff movements, his face red, his jaw tight. His smirk, his laughter, his mockery, all the weapons he had wielded so confidently, were gone. What replaced them was something raw, dangerous, and volatile. Rage. His eyes locked on me, and I saw it immediately, the way pride and humiliation twisted inside him like fire and oil. He had built his entire empire on dominance, on the certainty that no one could ever stand above him. And yet here I was, a janitor, stealing the spotlight with nothing more than calm silence and a steady hand on a key. He jabbed a finger toward me, his voice sharp and trembling. "This means nothing, do you hear me? Nothing. That car doesn't prove anything. Anyone could have stumbled into starting it. Anyone!" But his words rang hollow, and he knew it. The whispers from the employees contradicted him, spreading like wildfire. He knew what he was doing. That wasn't luck. He handled it like a professional. Each whisper was a knife twisting deeper into his pride. His face flushed darker, veins straining at his temples as he spun on the crowd. "Stop gawking. He's nothing. Do you hear me? Nothing but a janitor in a cheap uniform." The crowd fell silent. But silence wasn't victory. Silence was worse, because it wasn't loyalty that muted them. It was doubt. Doubt in him. Doubt born of awe for me. He turned back toward me, his teeth gritted, his voice lower but more venomous. "You think you've proven something, don't you? You think that just because you twisted a key, you're suddenly better than me?" I didn't answer. I simply leaned the mop against my shoulder, standing as calm as ever, my expression steady. That calmness, my refusal to rise to his bait, only stoked his fury. "Say something," he barked, stepping closer, his voice cracking under the weight of his own desperation. "Admit it was luck. Admit you don't belong near a machine like this. Admit you're nothing." Still, I said nothing. My silence wasn't defiance. It was dignity, and that dignity, unshaken by his rage, was more humiliating than any insult I could have thrown at him. He laughed then, but it wasn't the confident, booming laugh I had heard so many times before. It was bitter, strained, like a man trying to hold together a crumbling facade. He looked around at the employees, his eyes wild, searching for allies. "Do you really believe him?" he demanded, his hand sweeping toward me. "Do you honestly think this janitor knows more than me? That he's more than what he is?" But the crowd didn't answer. They avoided his gaze, shifting uncomfortably, unwilling to feed his pride. Their silence was damning. I could see the realization hit him, that the power he once commanded so easily was slipping through his fingers. His voice rose, desperate to claw it back. "This company exists because of me. This wealth, this car, this life. It's all because I built it. Not him, not anyone else. Me!" His voice cracked, the edge of hysteria bleeding into it. Employees exchanged wary glances, and I saw something I had never seen before. Pity for him. The man who once inspired fear now inspired nothing more than unease. I remained still, the mop resting lightly in my hand, my breathing slow and even. Inside, I could feel the storm raging in him, a storm that had nothing to do with me personally, but with what I represented. Proof that his power wasn't absolute. Proof that his arrogance had limits. Proof that one moment of laughter could unravel years of pride. He took another step closer, his face inches from mine, his voice a low growl. Do you think you've won something here? Do you think this changes anything? Because I'll tell you what changes. Nothing. You're still beneath me. You'll always be beneath me. I looked at him then. Really looked at him. His expensive suit, his polished shoes, his trembling hands barely able to contain the fury coursing through him. And I realized that for all his wealth, for all his luxury, for all his arrogance, he was fragile. His empire wasn't built on strength. It was built on fear. And fear crumbles the moment people stop believing. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. My silence said everything. The whispers began again, louder this time. Employees no longer hid their curiosity. Why is he so afraid? The janitor hasn't even raised his voice. It's like he knows something. The CEO whipped his head towards them, his eyes blazing. "Shut up!" he roared, his voice cracking. "Every last one of you, shut up!" But the damage was done. His rage wasn't silencing them. It was fueling their doubts. I could see it in his eyes then, the dangerous flicker of desperation. He wasn't just angry anymore. He was cornered. And a man like him, cornered, would do anything to claw back his pride. He turned back toward me, his breath ragged, his fists clenched. "You think this is over? It's not over. You've embarrassed me in front of my people, but I'll make sure they remember who's really in charge. I'll make sure they remember you're nothing." His voice dropped lower, filled with venom. "I'll destroy you." The courtyard went silent again, the threat hanging heavy in the air. Employees stared, wide-eyed, the weight of his words pressing down on them. Some looked at me with fear, others with sympathy. But all of them knew the truth. He meant it. I held his gaze, calm and steady, my silence unwavering. But inside, I felt the shift. This wasn't just pride anymore. This was war. The courtyard no longer belonged to the CEO. For years, he had commanded it like a stage, every entrance a performance, every laugh a weapon, every arrogant gesture a declaration of his untouchable power. But now, as whispers rippled through the crowd, the spotlight had shifted. His smirk was gone, replaced by a trembling rage, and all eyes drifted not to him, but to me. I didn't have wealth. I didn't have power. I didn't even have clean shoes. But what I did have was truth. And truth, once revealed, doesn't need to scream. It simply stands, unshaken, while arrogance collapses under its own weight. The employees had seen something they couldn't unsee. The janitor had done what their CEO swore was impossible. The Lamborghini had answered to my hands. My silence, my composure, my dignity, all of it had struck harder than any boast or insult. I saw it in their faces. Their respect for him, once unquestioned, now cracked like thin glass under strain. Some still clung to fear, too conditioned to let go of it. But others looked at me with something unexpected. Not pity, not mockery, but admiration. That was the wound the CEO couldn't bear. He stepped back toward the car, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the door. His voice rose, sharp and desperate. "You think this means anything? Anyone can twist a key if they get lucky. It's nothing more than a fluke." The employees exchanged doubtful glances, their whispers betraying them. It wasn't luck. You saw how calm he was. He knew what he was doing. The boss never looked that nervous before. Their words hit him harder than mine ever could. His eyes darted between their faces, panic flickering beneath his rage. "Don't listen to him. He's lying to all of you, trying to look like something he's not." But the more he shouted, the weaker his authority became. It was the same principle I had lived by in silence. Truth doesn't shout. Only lies feel the need to. Finally, he turned back to me, his voice dripping with venom. "If you're so confident, then prove it wasn't luck. Do more than start the car. Show us something." The crowd stirred with nervous anticipation. Some looked at me apologetically, as if silently warning me not to take the bait. But I knew this wasn't about cars anymore. It was about pride. I stepped forward calmly, my hand brushing against the sleek hood of the Lamborghini. "What would you like me to show?" I asked softly. He sneered, his lips curling into a bitter smile. "Explain the system. Explain how it works. If you're really who you claim to be, tell everyone why no one else could start it." A murmur spread. Employees leaned closer, eager for answers. This wasn't just a challenge anymore. It was a demand for proof. I nodded once. My fingers traced the curve of the hood as I spoke, my voice steady. "This car has a custom ignition lockout system, doesn't it? A biometric chip embedded in the key, synchronized with the car's ECU. Without the right signal, the engine won't respond, no matter how many times you turn it." The crowd gasped. Heads turned toward the CEO, who froze in place. I continued, my eyes never leaving his. "But what most people don't realize is that the system can be overridden, not with force, but with precision, by aligning the immobilizer with a backup code sequence hidden in the onboard computer. That's how I started it. Not by luck, by knowledge." The employees broke into a flurry of whispers, their voices filled with awe. "He's right, I've read about that system." How does he even know that? He really was more than just a janitor. The CEO's face darkened, his pride bleeding under the weight of their shifting loyalties. He slammed his hand against the car angrily. "So you read something in a manual. That doesn't make you special." I shook my head. "No, I didn't read it. I helped design it." The courtyard erupted. Gasps turned into full-blown shock, employees covering their mouths, eyes wide as the truth settled like thunder. The CEO's face paled, his confidence crumbling. I let the silence hang before speaking again, quieter but sharper. "You've built your empire on wealth, but I built engines like this with my own hands. The difference between us is simple. You own them. I understand them." The whispers turned into something else now, admiration that no longer hid itself. Eyes lit with respect, with curiosity, with disbelief that turned into belief. And that was when the CEO snapped. His voice rose to a shout, raw and jagged. "Enough! You're a liar, a fraud. You're nothing but a washed-up mechanic who couldn't keep his place at the table. That's why you're here, pushing a mop like the failure you are." The courtyard froze. His words were cruel, dripping with venom, but instead of laughter, only silence answered. Employees shifted uncomfortably, their pity now directed at him, not me. Because cruelty spoken in desperation doesn't command respect. It destroys it. I stood quietly, my gaze steady, my silence unbroken. My calmness was a mirror, forcing him to see himself for what he had become. Desperate, bitter, terrified of losing control. He clenched his fists, his breath ragged, his eyes darting wildly between me and the crowd. "Don't look at him!" he barked at his employees. "Look at me! I'm the one who pays you, not him. I'm the one you should respect." But respect isn't bought. Respect is earned. And the more he demanded it, the less he had. One of the younger employees muttered under their breath, just loud enough to be heard. "Respect isn't fear." The words struck the air like lightning. The CEO's face twisted, his rage boiling over. "Who said that?" he roared, his voice cracking. No one answered. They didn't have to. The truth had already spread. I could see it clearly now. His empire wasn't crumbling from the outside. It was collapsing from within. And all it had taken was one moment of truth to expose how fragile it really was. But a man like him wouldn't surrender gracefully. His pride was too vast, too brittle. His voice dropped lower, darker, his tone sharp with venom. "If I can't bury you with words, I'll bury you another way." The crowd stirred uneasily. Some exchanged fearful looks. Others glanced at me with silent warnings. Everyone could feel it, the shift from humiliation to danger. Because when pride is threatened, arrogance turns ruthless. For years, the CEO had commanded every room he entered with a single look, a single smirk, a single arrogant laugh. His presence was enough to silence conversations, his power enough to make people shrink into themselves. But that day, in the courtyard, something had shifted irreversibly. The man who once stood above all of us, untouchable in his wealth and authority, now stood trembling beneath the weight of a truth he could not control. I had not shouted. I had not begged. I had not tried to fight him with arrogance of my own. Instead, I had done something far more powerful. I had remained calm. I had spoken the truth. And I had let that truth stand on its own legs, and now, the very people who once bent their backs to his authority were beginning to straighten their spines. The whispers that had once been cautious now carried strength. He knew what he was doing. That wasn't luck. The boss never looked this shaken before. Each word was a nail in the coffin of his authority. I could see it in their faces. Their fear of him was crumbling, replaced by something stronger. Belief in me. For years, they had bowed their heads out of necessity, but now their eyes lingered on me with something I had not expected. Admiration, respect, hope, and that was his greatest humiliation. The CEO's jaw tightened, his lips pressed into a thin line as he scanned the crowd. He was looking for loyalty, searching for one familiar face to defend him, one voice to silence the rising tide of doubt. But none came. The silence spoke louder than words. And in that silence, his empire began to collapse. He laughed then, but it was hollow, strained, the kind of laugh that cracked under pressure. So this is what it's come to? You'd all rather believe the words of a janitor than the man who built this company? The employees shifted uneasily. Some lowered their eyes, but others didn't flinch. The balance of power had shifted, and he knew it. I stood quietly, my hand still resting on the hood of the Lamborghini. My silence was not weakness, it was strength. He had mocked me, humiliated me, tried to strip me of dignity. Yet here I was, standing taller than I ever had. Not because I had power, but because I had truth. One of the senior employees, a man who had worked for the company for over a decade, finally spoke. His voice was calm but firm. With respect, sir. We saw it with our own eyes. He didn't just get lucky. He knew what he was doing. You can't dismiss that. The CEO's head snapped toward him, rage flashing in his eyes. Careful, he hissed, his voice low and threatening. Remember who signs your paycheck. But the damage was already done. The spell was broken. Fear no longer controlled them the way it once had. Another employee spoke up, this time a younger woman, her voice trembling but resolute. Respect isn't about paychecks. Respect is earned. And today, he earned it. She glanced at me, her eyes filled with quiet conviction. The CEO's face twisted with fury. He opened his mouth to lash out, but the words caught in his throat. Because he could see it. He could feel it. The people who once trembled under his shadow were now seeing him clearly, stripped of his illusion. His arrogance had always been his armor, but now it looked flimsy, cracked, and transparent. I watched as he turned toward me again, his eyes narrowing. You think this changes anything? He spat. You think because you started a car and told a few stories that suddenly you matter? You're still nothing. You're still beneath me. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The silence between us was louder than his words. The Lamborghini's engine, still humming softly, seemed to mock him with every purr. The car he had once flaunted as his ultimate symbol of status now stood as proof of his weakness. It had bent not to him, but to me. The courtyard was heavy with tension. Employees lingered, waiting, watching, as though they were witnessing a great storm finally beginning to break. They had seen the CEO laugh at me before. They had seen him mock me, belittle me, treat me as if I were less than human. And they had seen me take it all with silence. But today, they saw something else. They saw his arrogance falter. They saw his pride collapse. And they saw me, calm, unbroken, unshaken. For the first time, the CEO wasn't the center of attention. I was. That realization was poison to him. His breathing quickened, his face flushed, and his fists clenched at his sides. His eyes darted across the crowd, desperately searching for a way to claw back his control. But every attempt only dug him deeper. "Don't be fooled!" he shouted, his voice cracking under the strain. "This man is a fraud. He's lying to all of you. He wants to make me look weak, but I'll prove it. I'll prove that he's nothing." His voice echoed through the courtyard, but no one moved. No one defended him. His words, once commands, now sounded like pleas. And in that moment, I saw it, clearly. The tables had turned. The man who once mocked me, who had stood over me with laughter dripping from his lips, now stood in the shadow of my truth. He was no longer untouchable. He was no longer feared. He was simply a man, fragile, desperate, crumbling beneath the weight of the respect he could no longer command. The emotional tension was unbearable. Each second stretched like eternity as the world seemed to watch him unravel. The silence of the employees, the hum of the car, the calmness in my posture, all of it pressed down on him like a vice. And then, his eyes locked onto mine, and I saw it, the flicker of something darker. Defeat wasn't an option for him. He would never admit it. Not here, not ever. His pride was too big, his ego too fragile. If he couldn't win with laughter, if he couldn't win with authority, then he would find another way. His lips curled into a smile, but it was not one of arrogance. It was colder, sharper, the kind of smile that promised something far more dangerous. Because men like him don't admit defeat. They plan revenge. The courtyard was still trembling from the silence that had swallowed the CEO's outburst. The Lamborghini's engine, steady and alive beneath my hands, purred like a heartbeat. My heartbeat, echoing across the courtyard and reminding everyone who had truly commanded this moment. The crowd's eyes darted between the CEO and me, their loyalties shifting with every passing breath. For the first time in his life, he stood powerless. Stripped of his laughter, stripped of his arrogance, stripped of the shield his wealth had always given him. I could see the cracks widening in his facade, his pride crumbling into dust, his eyes darting like a cornered predator searching for escape. And I knew, in that moment, I had him. I could have exposed him. Further, I could have spoken the truths I had kept buried, the deals I had seen, the corruption I had sensed, the lies that formed the foundation of his empire. I could have crushed him publicly, shattered whatever remained of his reputation, and left him with nothing but the wreckage of his arrogance. The power to destroy him sat heavy in my hands, as real and tangible as the wheel beneath my fingers. But I didn't. Instead, I let go of the wheel, turned the key, and silenced the Lamborghini's roar. The courtyard fell into a quiet so heavy it pressed against every chest, a silence that demanded attention. The car that had been his ultimate symbol of pride, the car no one else could start, now sat still, its engine no longer a weapon in our war of egos. I opened the door and stepped out. My uniform was wrinkled, my shoes worn, my face weathered by years of hard work. But at that moment, I stood taller than any suit, any boardroom, any luxury brand could have made me. The CEO glared at me, his mouth twisting, his fists clenched at his sides. He expected me to strike now, to humiliate him the way he had humiliated me. He braced himself for the blow he believed was coming, his pride preparing for war one last time. But I did something he could never have predicted. I simply looked at him. And then, with the calmest voice I could summon, I said, "You don't need me to destroy you. You've already done that yourself." The words struck harder than any accusation could have. They rang through the courtyard, soft yet heavy, a truth so undeniable that no one dared to laugh, no one dared to whisper. Even the CEO flinched, as though I had driven a knife through the last defenses of his pride. I turned my back to him. That single act, walking away, was the greatest blow of all. Because men like him thrived on conflict, on opposition, on being feared. But I gave him nothing. No anger, no revenge, only silence and dignity. As I picked up my mop and bucket from where I had left them, I felt the stares of the employees follow me. Their silence was different now, not the silence of fear, but the silence of awe. In their eyes, I saw something I had not expected to find. Respect, not pity, not sympathy, but genuine respect. And in that moment, I realized something profound. True power doesn't come from wealth. It doesn't come from cars or houses or the fear you can instill in others. True power comes from character, from the choice to rise above cruelty, from the strength to choose mercy when revenge is within your grasp. The CEO had always believed his power came from the things he owned, the empires he controlled, the people he could silence. But his wealth hadn't saved him that day. His arrogance hadn't protected him. His laughter hadn't shielded him. It was my silence, my dignity, my refusal to sink to his level. That was what destroyed him. I walked across the courtyard slowly, deliberately, each step echoing louder than his laughter ever had. The employees stepped aside, making space for me, their heads tilted slightly in respect. No one stopped me. No one mocked me. No one laughed. Behind me, the CEO's voice cracked through the silence, desperate and hollow. "This isn't over, you hear me? This isn't over!" But even as he shouted, even as he tried to claw his way back to power, I knew it was over. His words didn't carry the weight they once did. No one trembled at them. No one flinched. His voice, once feared, was now just noise. And that was the ultimate humiliation. As I stepped back into the shadows, mop in hand, I thought about the long road that had brought me here. Once, I had lived in a world not unlike his, a world of speed, of luxury, of prestige. I had touched cars like this Lamborghini not as a janitor, but as a man of skill, knowledge, and passion. But betrayal and tragedy had stripped it all away. I had chosen humility, chosen simplicity, chosen to live in the quiet corners where no one expected anything of me. And yet, here I was, reminded that no matter how far life pushes you down, dignity is never stolen, unless you give it away. I glanced over my shoulder one last time. The CEO still stood there, his chest heaving, his eyes darting desperately at the employees who no longer looked at him with awe, but with doubt. He was a king who had lost his crown, a man who had built his castle on sand, and the tide of truth had finally swept in. I could have stayed. I could have pressed my advantage, basked in his downfall, turned his empire to ash. But what would that have made me? No better than him. So I chose mercy. And that choice, I realized, was what would remain in the hearts of everyone who had witnessed this day. Not the roar of the Lamborghini, not the CEO's desperate shouts, but the quiet dignity of a janitor who refused to let pride dictate his actions. Because long after the sound of engines fade, long after wealth loses its shine, long after power crumbles, character is what remains. And I wanted them to remember not just what I had done, but who I had chosen to be. When I look back on that moment, the memory of the Lamborghini gleaming in the sunlight isn't what I hold on to most. It isn't the sound of the engine roaring beneath my hands, nor the stunned silence that fell over the courtyard when I proved what no one believed I could. No, the car was just a symbol, a piece of metal and leather wrapped in arrogance. The real lesson of that day had nothing to do with horsepower or luxury. It was about people, about respect, about dignity. The CEO thought the Lamborghini made him powerful. To him, it was more than a car. It was a throne, a crown, a declaration of his superiority over everyone else. Every time he revved its engine, every time he flaunted its shine, he believed it confirmed what he always thought, that he was untouchable, above the rest, worthy of admiration and fear. But arrogance is a fragile mask. It can cover the face, but it can never change the truth beneath. That day, his mask cracked, and for the first time, everyone saw him for what he truly was. Not a leader, not a visionary, not even a man of strength, but someone so desperate for validation that he built his pride on mocking others. And I? I was his favorite target. For months, I let his laughter roll over me like waves against a rock. I took the insults, the humiliation, the smirks, and the sneers, and I carried them quietly. People assumed my silence was weakness. They mistook humility for surrender. They thought I was nothing but a janitor, someone invisible, someone without worth. But the truth is, silence is not always weakness. Sometimes silence is strength. Sometimes silence is patience. And sometimes silence is simply the calm before the storm. That day, when I touched the Lamborghini's key and the engine roared to life, the silence broke. In that instant, I was no longer invisible. I was no longer the man mocked in the shadows. I was truth standing tall against arrogance. And what stunned everyone most wasn't the fact that I started the car. It was that I never gloated, never laughed, never returned humiliation with humiliation. I didn't need to. My calmness said more than any words ever could. The CEO's downfall wasn't caused by me. It wasn't caused by the car. It was caused by his own pride. He had built his empire on a foundation of fear, forgetting that fear is brittle. Once people stop being afraid, the walls collapse. Once people see the cracks in the mask, the illusion shatters. And that day, it shattered completely. I had the power to finish him. I could have dragged him down, exposed him, ripped the last scraps of pride from his chest, and left him broken in front of everyone. I had that power, but I didn't use it, because I realized something he never did. True strength isn't in how much you can take from others, but in how much you can give without expecting anything back. Mercy is stronger than revenge. Dignity is louder than arrogance, and respect, once earned, is worth more than all the wealth in the world. As I walked away, mop in hand, I knew the crowd wasn't just watching me leave. They were carrying the memory of what they had witnessed. They had seen arrogance crumble, they had seen truth rise, and they had seen the power of humility triumph over pride. That's what stays with people. Not the shine of cars, not the size of houses, not the weight of paychecks, but the way you treat others. Because you never truly know who someone is. That janitor sweeping the floor, the waitress serving your table, the driver opening your door, the clerk ringing up your groceries. They might hold more stories, more wisdom, more strength than you could ever imagine. They might have been someone once. They might still be someone now. And even if they are not, even if their life is simple and humble, their worth is not measured by their job or their status. Their worth is measured by their humanity. The CEO never understood that. To him, respect was something to be bought, demanded, forced. But respect earned by fear is not respect. It is submission. And submission disappears the moment truth stands up. That's why he lost. And that's why I won. Not because I humiliated him, but because I refused to become him. When I walked away that day, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because I had proven something to him, but because I had proven something to myself. That dignity is unshakable when it comes from within. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need his downfall. I only needed to remain true to myself. And yet, I often wonder about the lesson others carried from that day. The employees who watched, the people who whispered, the ones who gasped when the Lamborghini came to life under my hands. What stayed with them? Did they see just a moment of surprise? Or did they see the truth behind it? Did they understand that life is full of hidden stories and that arrogance blinds us to the value of those around us? Did they realize that mocking someone doesn't make you powerful? It makes you small? I hope they did. Because life has a way of humbling the arrogant and lifting those who carry themselves with quiet strength. That day wasn't about a car. It wasn't about me. It wasn't even about the CEO. It was about respect. The respect every human being deserves, no matter their job, their status, their wealth, or their title. The respect that can't be bought, can't be demanded, can't be faked. The respect that is earned through kindness, humility, and truth. So now, I turn the question to you, the one who hears this story. What would you do if the janitor you mocked turned out to be the only one who could unlock your pride? If this story made you think twice about respect and pride, don't forget to hit the like button. It helps us share more eye-opening stories with you. Tell me in the comments, what would you do if the janitor you mocked turned out to hold the key to your greatest lesson? I read every response, and your thoughts matter here. And if you want more stories that challenge arrogance and inspire truth, make sure to subscribe and join our journey of lessons that last a lifetime.